Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome back to the Collision Live. Almost here as always, except for the weeks when we don't have a live stream like last week.
Except when it's not.
Yeah. Daniel here, joining at the desk by my friend, my pal, my coworker, my partner, the one, the only Sam Camp.
Good to be with you, Daniel.
Yeah, and it's good to be with you as Sam was out of town last week, which left all the running the live stream, the technical stuff, to me and Manda, who's behind the camera. And we had no live stream last week, so that will tell you how well I did in that role. Again, I prefer to be on this side of the camera. It's probably where I should stay. But again, there's a lot of stuff going on. We have 2 weeks worth of kind of pop culture news, drama, interesting stories to talk about. And really, we can just jump right into, because I think there's a lot to get into with this first topic. And this has happened a couple of days ago. This whole, like a Death Star blast to Alderaan kind of blew things up, shook things up in the Star Wars universe, and really this in the pop culture discussion. The firing, the cancel culture, however you want to frame this. Gina Carano is one of the stars. Again, she's one of the stars, although she is was more of a secondary character. She'd pop up every couple of episodes. But The Mandalorian as a show is probably the biggest, one of the, if not the biggest things on TV right now, streaming on Disney Plus. Again, this is a hugely successful show.
I think it was the first streaming show to crack the top 10 of the Nielsen rating.
I think I saw. It's like this thing.
It's a big deal.
It's a juggernaut. Again, and it's really, which is surprising given some of the publicity that Star Wars has had in recent years. Like almost across the board, just positive reactions to this, and I think that does tie into some of the recent stuff that Gina Carano. Again, she's plays the character in the show Cara Dune, an ex-rebel fighter. And after the war, she's an interesting character. Yeah. She's an interesting person, an interesting actress, kind of coming out of the the MMA fighter background, making her transition as a lot of these kind of stars have been doing in recent years. Yeah. But again, we've talked about her on this show, the Collision Live. I think maybe even our first episode we ever did, or one of our first ones, we talked about some of the controversies that she'd kind of been bringing up and surrounding her. Well, all that came to a head this last week, where she was announced to Disney that she was let go. She will no longer be on the show. And again, according to the report by Lucasfilm, that there's no plans to include her in any property going forward. They have cut firmly the ties between the studio and the actress. And again, this is, at least on the surface, this is based on a recent tweet she did that a lot of people kind of took offense to. Again, I think we can get into it discussing it. I think it wasn't a great tweet. Maybe not as much as horrible as the PR announcement came out. But again, this raised some issues, and Lucasfilm kind of reacted, cut ties with her. And sort of the discussion that I think is interesting for us to have is sort of the aftermath of this. Because again, this is brought up, the main discussion again of cancel culture and this sort of this very only one kind of worldview that it's allowed in Hollywood. And again, our last episode we talked a bit about this as well. Yeah. But it's brought this important discussion back to the forefront of culture. And I think this is a complicated issue. I think there's a lot of layers to it. But thankfully, Sam is here to back from the mountaintop to clarify it for us. But what are your? I know you were out of town this last week, came back to discover some of this.
Yeah. So I didn't have great internet access the past few days, but I did do a little bit of reading on this. And I don't know. My first take is it's just honestly quite boring. Like, this person gets canceled. Yeah, but what about what this person said, that was on the other side of the aisle, but just equally as abhorrent? And I don't know. It's just like, just spending so much time on this, like, oh, this person doesn't have the right ideology and this person does. And how dare this corporation end their agreement? And I don't know. It's just, it seems like as a whole, And as a culture, we're just spending a lot of time on ultimately some pretty dumb, boring stuff. It's like the good art's not getting made because we're too concerned about like all these other things, right? And so that's sort of my first reaction to it is it's like, okay, like, so what thing is it going to be that I need to be outraged about? And like, are we done with this yet? Like, is it over? Like, can we just get on to making great things, whatever they are in the future? But on the other hand, it just, again, highlights, I think, a double standard in Hollywood. And then it also gets to the idea of, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, with what happens after this. Do disgraced Hollywood actors have a place to go after they're dropped by big name studios? And in Gina's case, she does.
Yeah, and again, she, I guess, and as part of sort of laying out the story, right after that, she was let go. She announced like the next day, that she just signed a film deal with the Daily Wire, which we talked about last episode, kind of Ben Shapiro's conservative entertainment kind of network plans, and so she'll be starring in and producing. It's in some ways it's a not an upgrade as far as like the scope, but she's a new opportunity in her career from that. But again, I think you touched on, I think it's in some ways this is more of like a social media issue than it is even like a Hollywood entertainment. I think now, because of Twitter, because we have access to like the late night thoughts of some of the actors and actresses in these shows, we know more what they, back in the day when we were watching a show, unless you like bought a magazine and read an interview or something, you just didn't really know what people thought, what political, who they voted for, how they thought. But now, because we have that access all the time.
Yeah. And it's the amount of the data coming in too, like everybody has opinions and thoughts, and you're just bombarded with it constantly. And I was trying to think if I actually follow any like famous like actors or like musicians on Twitter, and I don't know that I do. There might be like one or two, but like I honestly don't really care that much. Like, I loved Matt Damon in The Bourne Identity. Don't really care that much what he's like as a person necessarily, but it's like he does great work and that's good for him. But it's like, I think there's been a lot of people who, and it's been, I think, amplified by the pandemic. It's like we're stuck at home with nothing to do but live vicariously online and be overly concerned about the lives of everybody else. And so that just sort of breeds this sort of like just very unhealthy landscape.
Yeah, and I think again this whole story it's interesting in several ways, because again I don't believe she identifies as a believer or a Christian. I think she's made comments about how she hasn't been to church in decades, and but again she's identified as a conservative, and there's obviously overlaps in that worldview. But this whole kind of messy story I think does raise some interesting questions for how as kind of conservatives or how as Christians, how do we kind of navigate a world that seems to, or at least a segment that's sort of the entertainment arts culture that is, I think you can't deny there is a very clear bent towards one worldview, one belief system. I don't think that's in question. But at least to me, I think there can be two things true at the same time with this story. I think one, cancel culture is real. There is a bent. Had she been posting these same comments from kind of a more liberal perspective, does she get let go? It's hard.
Well, and I guess the other side of that, and I've seen people point to this, is something that her co-actor,
Pedro Pascal
has posted a very similar sort of idea, but from a left-leaning perspective, and he hasn't been let go.
Yeah, so I think there's, I think one factor that definitely does play in when you're the star of the show, it's a lot
Yeah.
You have a longer leash than if you're disappearing in a couple episodes. And I think that's sort of the other side. I think there is clearly, you can't deny that it is hostile to people that hold conservative beliefs, people that hold Christian beliefs. We've seen that with Chris Pratt and some
Yeah.
other people. On the other side of it is that I think people that are approaching this sort of as like a one strike. She made one tweet, and Pascal made the same tweet, and he wasn't let go. I think that's kind of missing a lot of what's going on in the story. I think this, in a lot of ways, this is more of a PR driven move than it is necessarily even just an ideological one. Where she's been in the news like almost every week in this show. As I'm looking through what topics, there's an option to do a Gina Carano story. She revels in that. Like she's posting these things to get a reaction. Like she comes from the MMA fighter background. Like she loves.
Yeah, there's a lot of hot air that happens. In that realm.
Like she clearly she's getting a charge out of doing this, and I think I saw just this morning some article where they're interviewing some sources saying that Lucasfilm's kind of been looking for a chance to separate from her for a while, because again, people are saying, "Oh, this one tweet, she got fired for." Like the reality is that she probably made more socially kind of controversial tweets in the past with some of the pronouns and some of that discussion that we talked about on this show, and she wasn't let go. I think Lucasfilm. Right. So it's not necessarily that if you express any conservative viewpoint, you're gone. And again, she was active on Twitter and stuff before she was even hired. So she was hired as a conservative. So again, it's not necessarily just sort of if you open your mouth at all as a conservative, you're out. It is more that she'd become a distraction. Again, you could say rightfully or wrongfully so. She'd become kind of a constant distraction in a show that really had nothing but positive buzz. Right. And I think at least my kind of take on it is that it seems like it was driven more by that, saying, hey, we can cut ties. She's not essential to the show, even if she's a great character. And she's kind of purposely trying to stir the pot. Again, there were stories that in her own interview where Disney had tried to get her to apologize for some of her earlier tweets. And again, you can whatever we think about whether she should or should not. And again, she wouldn't play ball. She's like, no, I'm going to speak my mind. I'm not going to go with the PR spin. And I think it's more just sort of poking the Disney bear long enough that eventually they cut ties. And Monty on Facebook here says, I suspect that she knew she was going to be let go at some point anyway, and already had the Daily Wire deal in place.
Which I could believe that.
Yeah, and again, the only thing with that I would wonder is I think, because again, I think in some ways cancel culture is terrible, but it's also somewhat good for business. Like I think as soon as she got fired, censored, her social media numbers skyrocketed overnight. She had like 600,000 more followers, and she got a movie deal. And I think because I don't think without the controversy are people lining up to hand her a directing, producing deal, like maybe in the future, but she's a new actress herself,
right?
Kind of a budding star. I think because she's sort of obtained this like folk hero status, as she's part of the resistance now. That now they're gonna sell the Daily Wire will sell her movie on the narrative that this is the stories that Hollywood didn't want you to hear. She was canceled, and we're fighting back. And again, I think there's obviously a lot more we could get into with that, but I think the discussion, the important one is, in some of this and some of her kind of pushing back. I've seen a lot of stuff on social media like, this is how we fight back. This is the way we do it. If they cancel us, then we're going to go and start making our own movies. And I guess the question for us as Christians is this how we fight back? If, obviously I think it's a more complicated story than some of the, she was just cancel cultured, one tweet and you're out, Hollywood hates conservatives. I think less of that, whatever you think of that, it is hard for people of a certain worldview. So is that the best approach to,
Well, it's certainly an approach to how the mechanisms in place to have an alternative career that's not, sort of in the mainstream Hollywood studio. And so on the one hand, I think it's good that there are alternatives. And I think that can ultimately be good for the production of art and it can be good for business, like you said. Um, is that how you change Hollywood? I don't know. I could be, but there'd have to be a huge exodus of Hollywood talent, I think, to really gum up the works of the machine.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like in the extreme case of this, really is the way we're going, is you end up kind of making a parallel of what we see with like news networks now, where it's
Yeah.
it's your entertainment hubs are just very clearly, like the more conservatives that leave Hollywood and try and go to this kind of new alternative entertainment.
Yeah.
You're leaving what you left more pointedly liberal and secular than it was, as you're pulling out all the people that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't like. On the one hand, it's not bad to have alternatives. I think it can be good to, if you can't make your movie with this studio, that's why there's another studio, and competition I think ultimately is good. But I think you have to be careful of. So you leave this one place to create your own place that just becomes an echo chamber, and like you said with the news, I think that's where you can most readily see it. You watch something on MSNBC, the same story is incredibly different on, say, Fox News, and so now you just have these two like polar opposite takes on whatever's happening in the world today. And so is that good for entertainment? Just so now everybody's just preaching to their own choirs. And is art really able to make those changes in the world and affect people the way that it once could, with the same effect? Than if it's really only being seen by the people that agree with the art, which I think it loses its value.
Yeah, it loses
I think, in culture.
the ability to make you think, because it's you are kind of the choir that's being preached to. And again, I think it's just we can move on to the next topic, but I think just as Christians, again, we're called to be in the world but not of the world. And I think obviously this isn't necessarily a religious bent story, but it's sort of how it is. I think a parallel though, like how do you kind of speak your mind, not just sort of bow down to whatever the culture is saying, but at the same time, how do you do that in a way that doesn't just force you to go off and kind of behind your walls and live your own kind of safe?
Yeah.
Like, how do you answer in entertainment in Hollywood as she was, while still staying true to her beliefs?
Yeah.
And I think some of that, again, this comes down to how we use social media. I think there are consequences to poking the bear, or just to causing controversy or drama,
right? And
for the sake of.
I think you can still make points that are contrary to maybe the mainstream, but do it in a way that's not being necessarily belligerent or just too simplistic about stuff. And so, like, I think you can have opposing views and express those in ways that aren't just like a meme, basically, to poke at whatever.
Yeah, like if you're posting to get a reaction, I think the fact is that you're going to get a reaction, and
Right.
whether it's fair or not, there's this. I don't know. I think there's obviously the story's still unfolding, so we'll kind of keep following some of it, what comes out from it. But it's just a messy situation. I think there's lots of questions that we should ask, even if not a whole lot of answers yet.
And I would just say, just be aware of reductionist takes on things. So it's never just like, oh, what, you got fired for a tweet? It's like, well, I doubt it.
Yeah, and again,
on either side, just
and like James Gunn is probably the most vocal liberal in Hollywood, and he was fired by the same parent company for, I think, tweets that were even less relevant that he'd apologized for. And so it's not as simple as just liberal, they can get away with anything. It's not as simple, but again, there's a lot there. Another story that. Again, if you guys have thoughts on that too, we'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of perspectives on this issue. Another thing that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I wanted to, especially the Super Bowl just ended recently. A lot of talk about the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time, Tom Brady. Well, another GOAT, another greatest of all time, just celebrated his 89th birthday. still going strong. John Williams,
Still the man.
he's still the man. He's directed, like, honestly, his greatest hit CDs are just like a compilation of everything he's done. Like
Oh man.
he's done so much amazing music. But I thought, not only just to celebrate his music, but just sort of for us to think about what is the role of music in film. I think it's sort of an underrated part of sort of the cinematic experience that we don't think about as much. But again, if you haven't seen it, like Google, I forget, I don't know what the video is called, but it's the Star Wars celebration scene at the end of the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, where they took out the score, and it's like Luke and Han, and they're walking down, and it's like it's awkward.
It's the most awkward.
Like it's the most awkward.
Music, yeah.
And you can kind of do that for any thing. If you take it out, it's sort of like bass guitar. Like you realize, I guess we do need it, even if we didn't notice it. But what do you think? Why do you think film music is so important? And what would be your favorite, work of, whether by John Williams or someone else, as far as?
That's a tough one. Well, I think part of the reason I think that music is such an influential part of movies, and that perhaps gets overlooked, is because it is, in broad strokes, it's the most universal language, right? Like, it doesn't matter what language you speak, you can be listening to some music, whether it's jazz or pop or a score or a symphony or whatever, and the emotion of the music seems to be quite universal. So it's sort of at a baseline, everybody can relate to music in some way, and I think everyone does relate to music in some way, and it's an incredibly emotional tool, right? So I think it is at the core of emotions for people, I think, universally. I have no data to back that.
Yeah, and again, it's like a narrative. There's the obstacle, or the extra step of, you got to understand the language, you got to be able to understand some of that.
Yeah.
Where music, a child, even if they don't get all that's going on in a symphony, they can feel the music, they can dance to it, they can hear the beat.
Yeah.
And again, I think music's important for movies, is just a reminder too that it is, even with kind of doing what we do, where we're kind of analyzing culture and engaging with it, we can almost reduce films to just sort of vehicles for messages or intellectual content. And we kind of talk about films, even the reviews we do at the Collision, a lot of the stuff is, let's get deeper into what's the worldview, what's sort of going on behind the scenes, what is being affirmed, what is being kind of deconstructed. But I think music reminds us that movies aren't just about kind of content. They're emotional. I think that's why they're so powerful as a kind of an artistic medium, is they also are effective in the way they make us feel something.
Oh yeah. Well, and I was reminded of this actually. I recently finally watched Ford v Ferrari,
which is a great movie.
I did not realize just how good, and it just had me every beat. You're at the highs with Christian Bale's character, trying to figure out the car and all, and so you're somehow, and I don't know if it was just the frame of mind that I was in at the time, but I was tracking with it right along, and I think one of the things that struck me was the soundtrack to that. I think there's electric guitars at one point coming in, and he's testing the car to push it to its limit, and you're just you are just jazzed about this film, and I think a lot of it has to do with that soundtrack that it knew exactly when to kind of come in with the heavy music and just really take you on this ride emotionally, and there's some sad bits at the end, and you just feel those highs and lows, and I think most of that has to do with the soundtrack of that movie. And another one that comes to mind is with Tenet, Ludwig Göransson, I think is his name, who also scores the Mandalorian. Yeah. There's just this driving nature and heavy drums that sort of keep you in suspense and sort of kind of on edge throughout the film, which I don't think otherwise you would necessarily be there. And then,
well, I think there's value in that too, because it's again, this isn't necessarily just the music, although the music's a big part. But like when I did a review for the movie like Alien, which is one of my favorite movies, I kind of part of my takeaway from that is it's a movie like this is less about sort of what are the moral lessons, what insights into human nature. Like, there's some of that in almost any movie, but it's just about this feeling of fear,
Right.
and how how I think there's value as Christians as moviegoers to just feeling different emotions, to kind of tapping
Right.
into things that we wouldn't. And I think music is a big part of that.
I think it's a huge. I mean, if not like the most important, I think it's probably the greatest vehicle to tap into sort of the base emotions, the baseline emotions of humanity. Like, I think whether it's sadness, it's fear, it's excitement, I feel like music is just so powerful to do that. And then, so I think you could have like a mediocre film with a really good score that is probably a lot better than a really good movie with like kind of a weak score.
Well, that's I don't know.
I don't know.
Again, let us know if you guys have what's your favorite soundtrack. The King Arthur movie that came out a while ago, which I actually really like because I'm a fantasy guy. But that's sort of an example. It's a movie that it was okay, but man, it had a killer score,
Yeah.
soundtrack that. But again, I think, and that's part of why I think movies are kind of the ultimate, maybe not the best, but like the ultimate kind of artistic medium, is because it's like, in a lot of ways, it's a combination of it's visual, you have the narrative aspect, you have the music that kind of combines all the other arts, which is why I think movies are the most influential in culture.
Well, so for you, what would you say is your favorite?
Yeah,
I
so
know
I think,
I totally dodged the question. But
and again, guys, if you guys have a favorite, let us know too. But I think it's hard to go against the original Star Wars score. Is this the favorite? Obviously, there's, Indiana Jones is great. There's tons of great ones.
I mean, and even like Harry Potter.
Yeah, Harry Potter. John Williams did that. He's E.T. He's done so many. The original Superman. But I was gonna say I think it might not be like the best or my favorite, but I think as far as like the best use of music in a movie has to be Jaws. And obviously, we have a Jaws poster. I have a Jaws shirt. So I'm a
Just
fanatic. Yeah, so Jaws hoodie. But just that simple kind of do 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 do. Just the way that is so integral. Like, Jaws isn't Jaws without that 2-note score. I think it's you'd be hard pressed to think of a more kind of essential musical part to.
I think that's a good answer. Yeah. I'll accept it.
You approve. And again, I know people have talked about like the Marvel stuff. That's the soundtracks really is one area that they just haven't been able to crack.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Because like the Avengers, it sounds nothing like that. But that score.
That Avengers score.
But I don't know what Captain America's score or Thor's score is like.
No. I think Star Wars is probably one where it is the most iconic for sure. I think just the score, just the main theme of Star Wars. I feel like it's probably the most recognizable. Like, I think if you played the theme of Captain Marvel,
no one
would anybody know it?
Yeah, and obviously, Star Wars has had a long time to milk that score, but man, it still resonates after all these years.
Yeah.
So this week at the Collision, not a whole lot of just kind of new stuff. I would encourage you guys, if you guys haven't done so, subscribe to our channel. We do have a lot of stuff that we're doing here on the. Reviews and live streams and kind of some new stuff, ideas that are brewing coming. So if you guys haven't subscribed to our channel, we'd love for you to join, become a collider, join what we're doing here and kind of keep up with all of that. But what about the sort of cultural observations? Anything else you noticed? We have 2 weeks of observations.
Yeah, and for all those 2 weeks, I probably didn't really notice that much. But I would just again kind of go back to I just recently watched Ford v Ferrari, and just what a great movie that was. Like, I don't know, like it was just really, really good, and I'm sad that it took me so long to watch it. I watched the first 2 episodes of WandaVision,
and
I guess I'll watch the 3rd, and maybe something will happen.
I've been told that watch at least the first 3, because that's when things start making sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know what's going on, but
Yeah.
see.
Again, I had
TBD.
I had promised or that I would maybe start watching it, and I haven't. I'm still intrigued to do. Again, I'm not a huge Marvel guy, but maybe I'll finally do that. A couple things I kind of noticed going on. One, just give another shout out to T Swift. Taylor Swift has re-recorded her "Fearless" album.
Oh, really?
You know,
I missed
there
this.
was a big fight for her rights and sold the rights to her songs.
Oh,
And
right.
so sort of her way to get back in that is just to re-record them all because she owns the songs, just not the recordings. So she re-recorded her "Fearless" album. And I thought, not that I'm necessarily lining up and ready to watch, but as soon as we've given Taylor Swift a hard time at the Collision for some of her views and political stances and all that, but "Fearless," I don't care if you don't think that was a great album that you spun many times, then you're probably a liar. That is her best album. Love Story, Cinderella Story, some of those, like it's some good music. Again, I don't know if you've been following any of this, the whole Snyder Cut thing. Have you followed any of?
No, please do tell.
Again, so this will probably be maybe a main topic for a future show when this comes out. But
Is this is in the director?
yeah, so
Okay.
the Justice League movie that came out and kind of bombed, the Zack Snyder, the
I think
director,
I did see something about this.
backed out because of some personal tragedy halfway through. Josh Wheaton, who's been in the news for not good reasons, took over and finished the movie. And the movie kind of bombed. People had issues with it, and there's for like years there's been this people want to see the Snyder Cut. How would he have finished the film? And it became sort of this joke. People are always the Snyder Cut. As if that's gonna ever happen. Just move
Yeah.
on. But they're releasing it. Like he went back and he finished some of the shots. Like they refilmed some footage. I think it's like a 4-hour movie. But it's coming out on HBO Max, kind of to help sell that streaming thing. But it's just crazy. The whole narrative of sort of like, in some ways it's even similar to like the cancel culture stuff as far as like the power of like I don't want to call them a mob because it's not like they're doing it like in an angry sense.
Is
but
it
like,
the power of the people?
but it's like the power of a hashtag to like,
It is crazy what can, and maybe that's a good place to end it today, but just how a hashtag can have such influence, and it's such a small representation of the actual population.
yeah.
I think is the thing to remember. It's like, oh, this thing is trending on Twitter. It's like, okay, like 10% of the world, 2% of the world is interested in that. And that is what is moving big corporations.
Yeah, and it's crazy because obviously cancel culture, cancel Gina Carano, like obviously there's fruit from that. Then you also have this where like big production companies are kind of not giving in maybe, but like they're being dictated in a lot of ways just by some of these movements. But it's crazy. Again, it's a movie that no one really cared about his other movies. Like they're all controversial. I don't know why people are so intrigued. I think this is the narrative of it. We do have, then we'll end here. But Shelly on YouTube says, the end of the 3rd episode will hook you in. I watched the whole thing last night. Wow, that's how many? I think there are 6 episodes out maybe already.
Of WandaVision?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So maybe I'll let Sam watch episode 3 and then I'll
let you know,
I'll see if I'm hooked in, and then we'll do it. But hey guys, thanks for joining us. Sorry we bailed last week with some of our technical issues. Glad to have Sam back, so hopefully that won't be a problem next week. But again, if you guys are watching this back later, weren't able to join us live, let us know some of your thoughts on both these topics. But the whole cancel culture, Gina Carano thing, kind of let us know.
Favorite film score?
Favorite film score. We love to just have a dialogue about some of that. Hear some different perspectives as we try and kind of engage this culture and navigate through it as Christians. But hope you guys have a great week. Go outside, do something fun. Hopefully avoid the snow if that's where the part of the countries you're living in, and continue to collide with the world for Christ.